Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom to the whole house of Yashar'al, the whole Ba'it of Yashar'al, all 12 tribes worldwide, wherever you are listening under the sound of the Master's voice being spoken through his servant, wherever your feet are touching the soil on this most kadush, this most set apart, this most separated day, in which is not just a day, simply a day, but it is in fact Yahuwah, and it is the day that identifies him as the Elohim of creation. It is the day that identifies us as his covenant people. It is the day that in fact joins us into covenant with him. Shabbat Shalom to you and to your entire house, wherever you are listening under the sound of the Master's voice being spoken through his servant this day. Shabbat Shalom to the elder brother Yehuda. Shabbat Shalom to the younger brother Ephraim. Shabbat Shalom to the former stranger, the former foreigner, the former Gentile, who was formerly estranged from the everlasting covenant, but having received the Ruach of adoption, the Ruach HaKadosh, the Ruach of Yahusha HaMashiach, and whereby having been engrafted into the olive tree, who is Yahusha, who is Yasharal, and whereby now being privy to the same everlasting covenant and promise and inheritance that was given to Yasharal and to Yasharal alone. Shabbat Shalom to you, peace and blessings, Shalom and Barak'u to you and your entire house, wherever you are, listening under the sound of the Master's voice being spoken through his servant on this day. Shabbat Shalom to you, peace and blessings, Shalom and Barak'u to you and your entire house. If you are perhaps on YouTube and you are listening for the first time, once this message, this proclamation, this teaching has been uploaded onto YouTube, and you are asking yourself, because this is perhaps your first time, maybe a video has been shared, or maybe the Master calls you to stumble across Yahuwah's remnant this day. And you are asking yourself, perhaps, who is or what is Yahuwah's remnant? Well, we will begin by telling you what and who we are not. We're not some church. No, we are not some church. With just a cursory search of the word or the name church, you will find in the etymology of the word church, you will find the name Kirke. Who is Kirke? Kirke is known in Greek mythology as the Greek goddess of sorcery and wine. She is known for getting men drunk and turning them into abominable things, more specifically into pigs. You will find Kirke church in Revelation, the 17th chapter. There she is called Babal the Great. There she is called the Great Whore. There it is said that the earth, the whole earth, is drunk with her wine. There it is said that she has a cup full of abominations. There it is said that this great whore is dressed in purple and scarlet. There it is said that this whore rides a beast. This beast, more accurately, is her husband. She, this whore, is known as Semiramis, who goes by many names. Kirke is just one of them. The Queen of Heaven is another one of them. She, this beast that she rides, is her husband, Nimrod. This beast there is also known as the fourth beast. There have been four beasts in the history of man. The first beast was Babylon. The second beast was the Medes and the Persians. The third beast was Greece. And the fourth beast that is going to last until the end, according to Daniel Adonial, is Rome. Rome, each beast representing the beast, which is Nimrod, who represents Hasatan. This is the fourth beast in which she rides, in which it is said there in the 17th chapter of Revelation that she sits, both she and this beast sits on 7 hills. If with just a cursory search, you will find that Rome, the fourth beast, was founded upon 7 hills. Who is Rome? Rome is the progenitor of the church. Rome is the progenitor of the Kirky. This word church, this word Kirky is so vile, so deceptive, and so wicked that the fourth beast, Rome, the Catholic Kirky, when William Tyndale, who was the first to translate the Ba'it Kadashah into the English tongue, what you know as the New Testament, when he came across in the Hebrew text the word kahal, he properly translated that word into assembly. Moreover, when he came across the word ecclesia in the New Testament or the Ba'it Kadashah, he indeed properly translated that word into assembly. For his work, the fourth beast, the Roman Catholic Kirky, the Greek goddess of sorcery and wine, tied this man to a stake, strangled him to death, and burned his body because the false power of the church was taken away from him, taken away from it. This is who the fourth beast is. This is who the Kirky is. We're talking about the church. We're talking about the Greek goddess of sorcery and wine. No, we're not some church. We're not some 501c organization. We're not some ministry, and we're not some camp. We simply are who we are, and that is Yahuwah's remnant assembly, his remnant kahal, his remnant ecclesia, of whom he is gathering in this end time season, gathering us from the 4 corners of this flat plain earth, sealing us with the seal of the living Elohim, writing his name upon our forehead, gathering us and bringing us behind the safety of the confines of a fence, the place in which sheep belong. A place of safety, if you will. A place of preservation, if you will. A holding place, if you will. A point of embarkation, if you will. Awaiting the arrival of the Ark of the Covenant, which has already been sent to gather his covenant people from the 4 corners of this earth, to save us from the hour of trial, Yahuwah's distress, Yahuwah's trouble, the great tribulation, the hour of trial that is soon to come upon the earth, to try all men, to deliver us from this time, to bring us to Mount Zion, where white robes are waiting for us and a song that no one else can sing. This is who we are. We're not some church. We're not some 501c organization. We're not some camp, and we're not some ministry. We simply are who we are, and that is Yahuwah's remnant assembly, of which he has given a number in this end time season of 144,000, and of which he has identified as the house of Yahudah, his covenant people, of whom have never been divorced from covenant from him, although sent away, although sent amongst the nations in 70 AD. He has never divorced the house of Yahudah, not because of our righteousness, but because of his righteousness, and because of the promise that he gave unto sovereign Dawood, and that he would never lack a man to sit on the throne of Yahudah. This is who we are. We are Yahuwah's remnant, and we welcome you to Yahuwah's remnant Shabbat gathering. I am Dawood ban Yahuwah, and this is my Aisha, what you may know as wife, Ashayah.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Peace and blessings. Shalom and barakut to you and your entire house, wherever you are listening under the sound of my voice, of the Master's voice being spoken through his servant. There is a word. There is a word. Usually, lately, you've listened to the Master speaking through his servant, a word specifically for the house of Yahudah, a word specifically for his covenant people, albeit all who come out of darkness into his marvelous light and engraft into his covenant people through Yahushua HaMashiach, engraft into the house of Yahudah, who has never been divorced, and become a part of his covenant people. The scepter shall not pass from Yahudah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, Yahushua HaMashiach. Until two sticks become one, when Ephraim is once again joined with the stick of Yehudah, and we again become one nation, having one sovereign, Yahushua HaMashiach. This day, he has sent me to not only the house of Yehudah, but to the house of Ephraim and to the stranger. He has sent me to the whole house of Yasharal, to both the house of Yehudah and to Ephraim and to the stranger who would enjoin themselves to us. He has sent me to whomever would have ears to hear. And I pray that he gives all of you ears to hear this day what thus says Yahuwah to his people. I pray that he gives you ears to hear, because there is a dire warning. There's a dire warning for the whole house of Yasharal, both the stick of Yehudah and the stick of Ephraim and unto the stranger. There is a dire warning worldwide across this flat plain earth to the whole house of Yasharal, to whomever has ears to hear. Hear him. Hear what thus says Yahuwah to his people this day. We're not going to go into any pretense, or we're not going to go into any recaps, or we're not going to recap what the master has previously spoken to his people. There's no time. There's no time. He sent me with a warning this day. He sent me with a warning for his people. Take heed to his warning. Do not rebel against his word this day. Do not rebel against the voice of Yahuwah. Do not rebel against the voice of Yahuwah this day. Your very soul and your life is at stake. Do not rebel against the voice of Yahuwah this day. Not by coincidence, the title of this teaching, if you're taking notes, whether you're Yehudah or Ephraim or a stranger who has enjoined to us, the title of this message, this teaching, this proclamation is Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 113. Part 113. 13 being the number of rebellion. 13 being the number of apostasy, being the number of rebellion. Do not rebel against his word this day. Not by coincidence, he has sent me by with Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 113, with a warning for his people. Do not rebel. Do not rebel against this word. Again, 13 being the number of rebellion. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against this word that the master is speaking through his servant on this day. Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 113. Pasakh Warning. Pasakh Warning. The destroyer comes. The destroyer comes. Do not rebel against this word. Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 113. Pasakh Warning. The destroyer comes. The destroyer comes. Line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. Hear what thus says Yahuwah today. Hear the warning to his people. Do not rebel against this word, as 113 indicates. Do not rebel against this word, but hear what thus says Yahuwah this day to his people. It may very well save your lives. It may very well save your lives. Pasakh Warning. The destroyer comes. The destroyer comes. Turn with us to Shamut chapter 12, Exodus chapter 12. Shamut, Exodus chapter 12. Let your word, Master, go forth with power.
Yes, Master.
And strength this day in clarity. There has been much opposition that has stood up, Master, to try to prevent this word from going forth.
Yes, Master.
But who can stand against you? There is none that can stand against you. Indeed, I am weak, Master, but you are strong. And your strength is made perfect in my weakness.
Yes, Master.
Let them not see this broken down, weakened vessel.
Yes,
but let them hear your voice going forth in power and authority and clarity to speak to your people across the four corners of this flat plain earth, Master. Let a fire proceed from your conscience place. Let a fire proceed from my belly, Master. And let it consume all that is not of you.
Yes, Master.
In Yahushua's name. So be it. Shamut, Exodus chapter 12. Exodus Shamut, chapter 12. Exodus Shamut, chapter 12. Beginning at verse 1. Read, little one.
And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe and to Aharon.
Yes.
In the land of Mitzrayim,
yes.
Saying, This new month is the beginning of new months for you.
This new month is the beginning of new months for you. Read.
It is the first new month of the year for you.
Yes.
Speak to all the congregation of Yasharal, saying on the 10th day of this new month,
Yes.
each one of them is to take for himself a lamb,
Yes.
according to the house of his father,
Yes.
a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the beams.
Yes.
According to each man's need, you make your count for the lamb.
Yes.
Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year old.
A perfect one.
Take it from the sheep.
Yes.
Or from the goats.
Yes.
And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same new month.
Yes.
Then all the assembly of the congregation of Yasharal shall slay it between the evenings. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts,
Yes.
and on the lintel of the houses,
Yes.
where they eat it.
Yes.
And they shall eat the flesh on that night,
Yes.
roasted in fire, with unleavened bread,
Yes.
and with bitter herbs they shall eat it.
Yes.
Do not eat it raw,
Yes.
nor boiled,
Yes.
at all with water.
You're not, he hadn't sent me by to speak about the letter of Passover of Pasakh this day. You're about to receive some meat. You're about to receive the meat of the Torah this day. You're about to be taught Torah that will save your life. For Torah is life, and the goal of Torah is salvation. You're not going to hear the letter of Torah this day. Come on.
But roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its inward part. And do not leave of it until morning.
Yes.
And what remains of it until morning, you are to burn with fire.
This is indeed an ascending offering, the whole consummation of sin. Come on, read.
And this is how you eat it.
Yes.
Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet,
Yes.
and your staff in your hand.
Yes.
And you shall eat it in haste.
Yes.
It is the Pasakh of Yahuwah.
It is the Pasakh of Yahuwah. Of who?
Of Yahuwah.
Of Yahuwah. It is the Pasakh of Yahuwah and not of man. It is the Pasakh of Yahuwah. It is a Kadush event. Read.
And I shall pass through the land of Mitzrayim that night.
I shall pass through the land of Mitzrayim that night.
And I shall strike all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim.
And I shall strike all of the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim. Hold up. This is a distinction made this night. A distinction between the clean and the unclean. A distinction between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of Hasatan. A distinction between light and darkness. A distinction between good and evil. A distinction between the living and the dead. A distinction indeed between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of Hasatan. There is a distinction made this night. Indeed, this is a season of separation. This is a season of a great distinction. And a great distinction is getting ready to be made between his people. There was a distinction made this night between the clean and the unclean. Come on, read.
Both man and beast.
Yes.
And on all the mighty ones of Mitzrayim.
And on all the mighty ones of Mitzrayim. Come on.
I shall execute judgment.
I shall execute judgment. Read.
I
am Yahuwah.
And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are.
And the blood shall be a sign. Yahuwah. Aleph, U, Ta. Aleph, U, and Ta. The Aleph and the Ta, the beginning and the everlasting covenant, the Yul. Represented by a nail or a tent peg or something that fixes and adjoins. It indeed is the blood, the dam that joins us into covenant with him. Indeed, unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you have no life in you. Come on, read.
And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you.
I shall pass over my covenant people. Read.
And let the plague not come on you to destroy you.
And let the plague not come on you to destroy you. Read.
When I strike the land of Mitzrayim.
When I strike the land of Mitzrayim. Read.
And this shall become to you a remembrance.
And this shall become a remembrance unto you.
And you shall celebrate it as a festival to Yahuwah.
And you shall celebrate it as a festival unto Yahuwah.
Throughout your generations.
Throughout your generations.
Celebrate it as a festival.
Celebrate it, read.
An everlasting law.
An everlasting law, read.
7 days you shall eat unleavened bread.
7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Now we're not talking about the letter of Torah. We're talking about the living bread that came down from Shamayim. Unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you have no life in you. I am the living bread that came down from Shamayim. Your fathers ate the bread in the wilderness and died, but he who eats this bread shall never die. We're not talking about a cracker. We're talking about the living bread that came down from Shamayim. Come on.
Indeed, on the first day you caused leaving to cease from your house.
You caused sin to cease from this house. You caused the sin, the leaving, to cease from this house on the very first day. Read.
For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day.
For whoever partakes of sin from the first day to the 7th day. Read.
That being shall be cut off from Yasharal.
That being shall be cut off from Yasharal. Now let's look at this word cut off, and you're going to see it throughout this message. This is the Hebrew Abaite word karaf. Karaf, if you're taking notes, it is spelled K-A-R-A-T-H. In the English tongue, transliterated into the word karaf. Here, of particular note, you will find the Abaite letter Rosh and Thar. Rosh and Thar. The Thar is always indicative of covenant. Rosh is represented by the head and the beginning. So here it is stated that if you do this, you're going to be cut off from covenant. You're going to be cut off from the head forever. If you do not cause the leaven to cease from this house, you're going to be cut off from covenant. You're going to be cut off from the head, who is Yahuwah, forever. Hear him. Hear him. Read.
And on the first day is a Kadush gathering.
And on the first day is a Kadush gathering.
And on the 7th day you have a Kadush gathering.
And on the 7th day you have a Kadush gathering. Read.
No work at all is done on them.
No work at all is done in them.
Only that which is eaten by every being.
Only that which is eaten by every being. Come on.
That alone is prepared by you.
That alone is prepared by you.
And you shall guard the festival of Mazut.
And you shall guard the festival of Masut. Read.
For on this same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Mizraim.
For on this same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Mizraim, the Masut. The unleavened bread, it represents light. It represents righteousness. Thus they came out on the first day of unleavened bread at daybreak. They came out at light because the unleavened bread represents righteousness. It represents light. It represents the living bread that came down from Shamayim. It represents Yahusha, Hamashiach, us in him. Him and us, we must eat him. Him and us. Us and him, we must eat the bread. We must eat the unleavened bread. We must eat his flesh and drink his blood. He must be in us in order to possess righteousness. In order to possess life, we must eat him. Come on, read.
And you shall guard this day throughout your generations.
And you shall guard this day throughout your generations. Read.
An everlasting law.
An everlasting law. Read.
In the first month, on the 14th day of the new month, in the evening you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the new month in the evening. Barak
Yahuwah. It is slaughtered at night because this represents the deliverance from the kingdom of darkness and bringing us into his marvelous light. Indeed, the Mashiach hung at the 6th hour, being our Passover lamb, coming in the volume of the book in which the whole earth went dark from the 6th to the 9th hour. Showing that he came to deliver man from the power of Hasatan, from the kingdom of darkness, and to deliver us into his marvelous light. Come on, read.
For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses.
6 days he has given man to work, 6,000 years. And on the 7th day, the 7,000th year, Yeshua will come. He's given mankind 7 complete days or 7,000 years before the end, before eternity comes. And we must walk in unleavened bread for 7 days, 7,000 years. Come on.
For if anyone eats what is leavened.
For if anyone eats what is leavened, if you operate in sin,
that same being shall be cut off from the congregation of Yasharal.
Karaf, forever. You're going to be cut off from covenant if you continue in sin. Read.
Whether sojourner or native of the land.
Whether sojourner or native of the land.
Do not eat that which is leaven.
Do not eat that which is leaven. Do not partake of sin. Read.
In all your dwellings you are to eat unleavened bread.
In all of your dwellings we are to eat of the unleavened bread of righteousness, of sincerity and truth. Come on.
And Moshe called for all the elders of Yasharal and said to them,
Yes.
Go out and take lambs for yourselves,
Yes.
according to your clans,
Yes.
and slay the Pasakh.
Yes.
And you shall take a bunch of hyssop,
Yes.
and dip it in the blood that is in the basin.
Come on.
And strike the lintel and the two doorposts.
And strike the lintel on the two doorposts with life, for the life of the creature is his blood. Mark my people with life, because death is coming to gather what is his. He is coming to gather what is his. He, Hasatan, in Greek mythology is known as Kronos. He is the consumer of his children. He eats his children, and thus those who worship him in Malach worship or Baal worship pass the children through the fire to eat them. He, on this night, death, the destroyer, indeed he comes. The destroyer is coming to consume his seed. He is Kronos in Greek mythology. He consumes his own children. Come on, read.
With the blood that is in the basin and you.
Yes.
None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning.
Yes.
And Yahuwah shall pass on to smite the Mizrites.
Yes.
And shall see the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts.
And shall see life. Read.
And Yahuwah shall pass over the door.
And Yahuwah shall pass over the door.
And not allow the destroyer to come into your houses.
And not allow the destroyer to come into your houses, who is come to cut off. And not allow the destroyer to come into your houses. All who have life, who are seed of Yahuwah. He will cause the destroyer to pass over us and not allow him to come into our houses. Come on, read.
To smite you.
To smite you.
And you shall guard this word as a law for you and your sons forever.
Forever, read.
And it shall be when you come to the land which Yahuwah gives you.
Read.
As he promised.
Yes.
That you shall guard this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, what does this service mean to you? Then you shall say, it is the Pasakh slaughtering of Yahuwah, who passed over the houses of the children of Yasharal in Mitzrayim.
Who passed over his own, his seed. This is a distinction made between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of the adversary, between the clean and the unclean. Hear him. Between the clean and the unclean. Read.
When he smote the Mizrites and delivered our households.
When he smote the unclean and delivered the clean, those who had life plastered on the doorpost. Read.
And the people bowed their heads and did obeisance.
Yes.
And the children of Yasharal went away and did so as Yahuwah had commanded Moshe and Aharon. So they did. And it came to be at midnight.
And it came to be at midnight.
That Yahuwah struck all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim.
That Yahuwah struck all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim.
From the firstborn of Parah who sat on the throne.
From the firstborn of Parah who sat on the throne.
To the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon.
To the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon. You can stop right there. To the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon. This is a distinction here made this night. Hear him. A distinction between the firstborn according to Ruach and the firstborn according to the flesh. The firstborn according to Ruach is the seed of Elohim. The firstborn according to the flesh is the seed of Hasatan. This is a distinction made between the clean and the unclean. Hear him. Egypt is a representation of death. Egypt is a representation of the kingdom of darkness in which Hasatan reigns over. Egypt is a representation of sin, of slavery, of bondage. Each of us, whether you are now or were previously, an Egypt in and of yourselves. Yes, you were. Yes, you were. Egypt also represents the flesh. It represents the bondage of the flesh. The flesh is sinful. The flesh is in bondage. It has been sold into bondage to Hashatan, who was the Pharaoh of it. And the only way to be set free of it, indeed, is the Son, the blood of the Lamb. It is the blood of the Lamb applied upon us that sets us free from Egypt. Indeed, who the Son sets free is free indeed. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. We're not going to spend a lot of time here. But the Master wants you to understand that on this night, a distinction was made. Hear him. A distinction was made between the clean and the unclean. A distinction was made between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of Hasatan. A distinction was made between light and darkness, righteousness and unrighteousness. A distinction was made, as the Master had previously spoken in earlier chapters, that he will make a distinction between his people. I remind you again, this is a season of a greater separation. A greater separation. This is a season of a greater separation. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against the voice of Yahuwah. He made a distinction this night, and we're gonna leave it at a distinction between the clean and the unclean. Because hear him, Passover, Pasakh, was celebrated in the whole land of Masrayim. They were there in Masrayim. They celebrated Pasakh in the land of Masrayim. And a distinction was made there in the land of Masrayim between the clean and the unclean, between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of the adversary, who is Kronos in Greek mythology, who is the destroyer, who consumes his own seed, his own kind. Come on, little one, give us another precept.
Numbers 9, 1 through 14.
Numbers chapter 9, verses 1 through 14. We're going to come back to Exodus 12 shortly. Numbers 9, Barmatba, chapter 9. Numbers 9, verses 1 through 14. Barmatba, Numbers 9, verses 1 through 14. 1 through 14. Talking about the Torah. The Torah is life. If you understand the Torah and operate in the Torah and Ruach and in truth, because the letter brings death, the spirit brings about life. The flesh profits nothing. It is the Ruach, the spirit, that gives life. Bamapa, Numbers chapter 9, beginning at verse 1 through verse 14. Numbers chapter 9, beginning at verse 1, reading through verse 14. Beginning at verse 1, read, hear him, listen.
And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai.
Yes.
In the first new month.
Yes.
On the second year after they had came out of the land of Mitzrayim.
Yes.
Saying, now let the children of Yasharal perform the Pasakh at its appointed time.
Yes.
On the 14th day of this new month.
Yes.
Between the evenings.
Yes.
Perform it at its appointed time.
Yes.
According to all its laws and right rulings, you perform it.
Yes.
And Moshe spoke to the children of Yasharal to perform the Pasakh.
Yes.
So they performed the Pasakh on the 14th day of the first new month.
Yes.
Between the evenings in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that Yahuwah commanded Moshe.
Yes.
So the children of Yasharal did. But there were men who were defiled for a being of a man.
Listen, but there were men who were defiled for the being of a man. There were men who were defiled for the being of a man. Read.
So that they were not able to perform the Pasakh on that day.
So that they were not able to perform the Pasakh on that day. Read.
So they came before Moshe and Aharon that day.
Yes.
And those men said to him, we are defiled for the being of a man.
In other words, we are unclean now. For the being of a man, we are unclean. For the being of a man, a dead man. We are defiled for the being of a dead man. Read.
Why are we withheld from bringing near the offering of Yahuwah?
Why are we withheld from bringing the offering of Yahuwah? Read.
At its appointed time among the children of Yasharal. Yasharal.
And his appointed time among the children of Yasharal. Read.
And Moshe said to them,
Yes.
wait, let me hear what Yahuwah commands concerning you.
Listen to what Yahuwah says concerning you. Read.
And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying,
Read.
speak to the children of Yasharal, saying,
Yes.
when any male of you or your generations is unclean,
And of your generation is unclean. Read.
for a being,
Read.
or is far away on a journey,
Or is far away on a journey. Read.
he shall still perform the Pasakh of Yahuwah
He shall still perform the Pasakh of Yahuwah. Read.
on the 14th day of the second new month.
On the 14th day of the second new month, you better take heed. You better take heed and not partake of his Pasakh with uncleanness upon you. Read.
Between the evenings they perform it.
Between the evenings they perform it.
With unleavened bread and bitter herbs they eat it.
With unleavened bread, and this is the bread that came down from Shamayim. This is the bread of Yahushua HaMashiach. He is the living bread. He is the Lakam Shamayim. He is the bread of life that came down from Shamayim. He is the Pasakh lamb that we are to partake of. Read.
They do not leave of it until morning.
Read.
And they do not break a bone of it. According to all the laws of the Pasakh, they perform it. But the man who is clean and is not on a journey,
But the man who is clean and not on a journey,
and has failed to perform the Pasakh,
and has failed to perform the Pasakh,
that same being shall be cut off from among his people.
that same being shall be cut off from amongst his people.
Because he did not bring the offering of Yahuwah
Because he did not bring the offering of Yahuwah
at its appointed time,
at its appointed time.
that man bears his sin.
That man bears his own sin.
And when a stranger sojourns among you,
And when a stranger sojourns among you,
then he shall perform the Pasakh of Yahuwah.
then he shall perform the Pasakh of Yahuwah.
He shall do so according to the law of the Pasakh,
He shall do so according to the law of the Pasakh,
and according to its right ruling.
and according to its right ruling.
You have one law both for the stranger
You have one law both for the stranger
and the native of the land.
and the native of the land. Barak Yahuwah. Barak Yahuwah. Here again we hear cut off, which is in the Abaric tongue, karath, kaf, rosh, and thaw. Kaf, rosh, and thaw. Again, rosh is represented by head and beginning. Thaw is always indicative of covenant. So the one who is clean and does not partake of the Pasakh, you are not only, this is synonymous. If you cut off from the head, you're cut off from covenant. You're cut off from covenant. If you are clean and you do not partake of the Pasakh. Hear him. We're not talking about some lamb roasted in fire. We're talking about Yahushua HaMashiach. The one who is clean and does not partake of him, and does not partake of the bread, the living bread, the Lakam Shamayim, that comes down from Shamayim, will be karaf, cut off from his people. For there is one unforgivable sin, and that is the blaspheming of the Ruach HaKadosh. That is the rejecting of the bread of life. That is the rejecting of the Ruach HaKadosh, the bread that came down from Shamayim. If you were clean, and you do not partake of the Pasakh, if you do not partake of Yahushua HaMashiach, the Ruach HaKadosh, if you do not partake of the living bread, if in fact the only way that you can partake of it is if you are clean. The only way that you can partake of him is if you are clean. But if you do not partake of the Pasakh, we're not talking about a roasted lamb. We're talking about the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. If you do not partake of him and you are clean, if you do not partake of the unleavened bread, the Lakam Shamayim, the bread that came down from heaven, the bread of life, you will be cut off from his people forever. Cut off from the head and cut off from covenant forever. But again, there is one unforgivable crime, and that is the blaspheming of the Ruach HaKadosh. That is the rejecting of the Ruach HaKadosh. I did not come with the letter today. The master is coming with the Ruach of the Torah this day that will save our lives. Give us another precept, little one. Let's talk about more about that one unclean for touching the being of a man. Let's talk about that one. Turn to Numbers chapter 19. Numbers chapter 19. Numbers chapter 19. Chapter 19. Let's talk about the one who is unclean because of the being of a man, of a dead man. He is unclean. Numbers chapter 19. Chapter 19. All things according to the Torah. Numbers chapter 19, beginning at verse 1. Come on, read, little one.
And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe and Aharon, saying,
Yes.
This is a law of the Torah which Yahuwah has commanded, saying,
Read.
Speak to the children of Yasharal,
Read.
that they bring you a red heifer,
That they bring you a red heifer,
a perfect one,
a perfect one,
in which there is no blemish,
in which there is no blemish,
and on which a yoke has never come.
and on which a yoke has never come.
And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest.
And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest. In other words, it has never been in bondage. It has never been in bondage to Hasatan. It is perfect, unblemished. It has never been in bondage to Hasatan. Come on, read.
And he shall bring it outside the camp.
And he shall bring it outside the camp.
And shall slay it before him.
And shall slay it before him.
And Eleazar the priest shall take some of his blood with his finger.
And Eleazar shall take some of his blood with his finger.
And sprinkle some of his blood 7 times toward the front of the tent of appointment.
And sprinkle some of his blood 7 times for completion. And in the direction in front of the tent of witness. Read.
And the heifer shall be burned before his eyes.
And the heifer shall be burned before his eyes.
He burns his hide.
He burns his hide.
And its flesh.
And its flesh.
And its blood.
And its blood.
And its dung.
And its dung.
And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet.
And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet.
And throw them into the midst of the fire.
And throw them into the midst of the fire.
Burning the heifer.
Burning the heifer.
Then the priest shall then wash his garments and shall bathe his body in water.
Yes.
And afterward come into the camp.
And afterward come into the camp. Read.
But the priest is unclean until evening.
But the priest is unclean until evening.
And he who is burning it washes his garments in water.
And he who is burning it washes his garments in water.
And shall bathe his body in water.
And shall bathe his body in water.
And is unclean until evening.
And is unclean until evening. I pray you understand by now that this water does not clean. Not this water. It is only the living water. The living water of the Ruach HaKadosh that cleanses. Do you understand? It is only the living water of the Ruach HaKadosh that cleanses us from sin. Come on, read.
And a clean man shall gather up the ashes of the heifer.
Yes.
And shall place them outside the camp in a clean place.
And shall place them outside the camp in a clean place. Read.
And they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Yasharal.
And they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Yasharal. Read.
For the water for uncleanness.
For the water for uncleanness.
It is for cleansing from sin.
It is for cleansing from sin. Read.
And he who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his garments.
And he who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his garments.
And is unclean until evening.
And is unclean until evening.
And it shall be a law forever to the children of Yasharal.
How long, little one?
A law forever.
A law forever for the children of Yasharal. Read.
And to the stranger who sojourns in their midst.
And to the stranger who sojourns in our midst. Read.
He who touches the dead of any human being is unclean for 7 days.
He who touches the dead of any human being is unclean for 7 days. Read.
He is to cleanse himself with the water on the 3rd day.
He is to cleanse himself with the water on the 3rd day.
And on the 7th day he is clean.
And on the 7th day he is clean. Stop right there. The one who touches the being of a dead body, he must separate himself. He or she must separate himself from without the camp. Outside the camp. They must go unto him. They must go unto him. There are 2 offerings that were offered outside of the camp. The red heifer here. And when we read the book of Abarim of Hebrews, we find that there was another red heifer in the person of Yahushua HaMashiach slaughtered outside the camp. And so they must go out to him. To be cleansed from sin, they must go out to him. And in going out to him and being separated outside the camp, this is symbolic of being dead. It's not about the touching of a dead person. It's about you. You are dead. You are dead. So as a person touches a dead body and must go outside the camp from the presence of Yahuwah, for Yahuwah dwells in the midst of the people. The tent of tabernacle was in the midst of the people. When they touched the matter of uncleanness, a dead body, they were removed from his presence. As a body without breath is dead. A body without ruach is dead. Ruach meaning wind, meaning breath. Do you understand? Without ruach, without breath, without wind, you are dead and you are unclean. You are dead, stinking thing, you are unclean. Because the waters given for purification have not cleansed you. We're not talking about the immersion. Because the immersion, if you're not filled with living water, it's just a bath. If the living water of the Ruach HaKodesh does not enter you and cleanse you, who is Yahusha, this is why we must go out to him. You are dead. And you being dead, defiled for the being of a man, your own person. You are defiled because of you. You are dead. You are dead and you are unclean. Because you have not living water, you have not the Ruach HaKodesh. And you'd better not touch his Kadosh things. You'd better not touch the Pasakh. The Pasakh is Yahuwah, is Yahusha. And to partake of him, you must be clean. Oh, isn't that a conundrum? To partake of Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Pasakh lamb. To partake of Ruach HaKodesh, which is the living bread, which is the unleavened bread, you must be clean. You must turn from your wickedness. And if there is any wicked Ruach that are dwelling in you, that house must be cleansed. That house there must be an eviction notice. There must be a divorce decree. For he will not enter into another man's bride. If Baal be in you, if Hasatan be in you, he must be first cast out of you. The master has given word to you to go to the threshing floor, but to this day many of you have rebelled against this word. And you're still defiled. You're still unclean. You're still the house of Baal. And he will not come into you because he will not transgress Torah. He will not come into another man's wife. You must go out to him. You must go down to the threshing floor and cry out to him with all your being. For one cries out in the city in accordance with the Torah, a maiden engaged to another, indeed he's paid a price for you. And one stronger than her seizes her in the city. Both are to die, he because he is seized and he has defiled another man's wife, and her because she did not cry out. You'd better cry out. And you especially had better not partake of the Pasakh, because you're dead. The uncleanness of a being is upon you. You are dead. You have not living water. You have not breath. As a body is dead without breath, without wind, you are dead because the Ruach HaKodesh is not in you, and you are unclean. You are unclean. This goes to the whole house of Yasharal. 144,000 in this season is he sealing with the seal of the living Elohim. 1 in every 325,000 person. He's not playing anymore. He will not be mocked. You are unclean. You are a dead man. You are a dead woman because you have not breath. The living water has not cleansed you. You cannot partake of Pasakh. You are dead. This is Torah. This is Torah. This is the spirit of Torah. You are dead. It's not about touching some dead human body. Both Elijah and Elisha, all Yahu and all Isha touch dead human bodies, as well as the Mashiach. He touched lepers. He touched the unclean, but that did not defile him. It is sin that defiles. And unless you have partaken of our sin offering, Yahushua HaMashiach, you are still dead in your trespasses. You are still dead in your sins. You are a dead man. You are a dead woman. You are a dead stinking thing, and you are unclean. You are unclean, and you cannot partake of the Pasakh. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against this word. The one partaking of the Pasakh with uncleanness shall be cut off. Karath, it means to be destroyed. The destroyer comes. This word means to be destroyed. Indeed, there is a distinction between the clean and the unclean that is going to be made. The seed of Yahuwah and the seed of Hasatan. The clean and the unclean. He's getting ready to make a distinction. Do not rebel against this word. You know that you are unclean with your spirit of religion, your spirit of witchcraft and divination, necromancy, your spirit of lust and perversion. You know you're unclean. You know that you are unclean. You're a dead man or dead woman. And the Torah says you cannot partake of the Pasakh. You are unclean. You are dead because of the being of a man or a woman, which is yourself, because you have not breath. And a body without breath, without wind, is dead. And you are dead and you are unclean. Come on, read.
But if he does not cleanse himself on the third day, then on the seventh day he is not clean. Anyone who touches the dead of a human being and does not cleanse himself defiles the dwelling place of Yahuwah.
Defiles the dwelling place of Yahuwah. Defiles the dwelling place of Yahuwah. The master has stayed here for quite some time. Defiles the dwelling place of Yahuwah. Indeed, you are not his dwelling place. If you operate in continual and willful sin, and you are not his dwelling place if his breath does not reside in you. And if breath is not in you, you are dead. You are separated from him. You are without the camp. You are separated from him. You are dead. You are unclean. And you cannot partake of his Pasakh. You cannot partake of his Pasakh. Read, little one.
And that being shall be cut off from Yasharal.
And that being shall be cut off from Yasharal. You can stop there. Karath. That being shall be destroyed. That being shall be destroyed. That being shall be cut off from the head and cut off from covenant. There is one unforgivable sin, and that is rejecting the Ruach HaKadosh. For if you die dead, you will be separated from the Master throughout eternity. You will be separated from him and separated from covenant. Do not rebel against his word. If you do not have breath, you are not his dwelling place. You have defiled the dwelling place of Yahuwah. If you're touching dead things and engaging in willful sin when you are his dwelling place, you have defiled his dwelling place. But without his breath, without his ruach, without the living water of the red heifer to cleanse you, to cleanse the inner cup, to power wash the inner cup, there is no life in you. Unless you eat of his flesh and drink of his blood, there is no life in you. And if there is no life in you, you are dead. You are the firstborn of Egypt. You are the seed of the adversary. And he's coming. The destroyer is coming for the seed of the adversary. Where those who have life, who have the blood of the Lamb, he cannot harm. He cannot touch. This is a distinction between the clean and the unclean. This is a distinction between the living and the dead. This is a distinction between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of the adversary. Understand the Torah. A body without breath is dead, and you are dead without the Ruach HaKadosh, which means that you are unclean. The living water has not cleansed you, and you cannot partake of Pasakh. You partake of Pasakh with uncleanness upon you. You will be cut off from his people. You will be cut off from him. You will be cut off from his people. You will be destroyed. And those who are listening under the sound of his voice, you now have no excuse. You've never heard this word put quite this way. You have never heard it this way. You're hearing it now. And if you partake of his Pasakh, knowing that you are dead and unclean, the Torah says you're going to be cut off. You're going to be destroyed. A Pasakh warning. The destroyer comes. The destroyer comes. Give us another precept, little one.
Leviticus 7, 1 through 21.
Leviticus chapter 7 now. Verse 1 through 21. Ikra chapter 7, verse 1 through 21. Understand the Torah. The Torah is a compilation of childlike instructions given to us to teach us about deeper spiritual matters. This is about a body without Ruach. This is about a person separated from life, separated from the Ruach HaKadosh, from the Ruach of Yahushua HaMashiach, the living water. The red heifer, the living water of whom we all must go out to. We must go out to him to be cleansed, to be given life, to allow his blood to be poured into us. For the life of the creature is his blood. It is his blood that is poured upon dead dirt, dead soil, that resurrects us from the dead. It is the living water that cleanses the inward parts, that washes and purges us and cleanses us from all sin. It is the blood, the dam, that cleanses us from all sin and causes him to cover us in his righteousness and to make us worthy of partaking of the Pasakh. Otherwise, you are defiled for the being of a man, your own self. You are dead. You have not breath. You have not wind. You have not the living water. You are dead and you are unclean and you cannot partake of the Pasakh. Leviticus chapter 7 verses 1 through 21. Beginning at verse 1. Come on, read.
And this is the Torah of the guilt offering.
And this is the Torah of the guilt offering. Read.
It is most kadosh.
It is most kadosh.
The guilt offering is slain in the place where they slay the ascending offering.
Yes.
And its blood is sprinkled on the slaughter place all around.
Yes.
Then he brings from it all its fat, the fat tail and the fat that covers the entrails, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them by the loins, and the appendage on the liver, which he removes with the kidneys. And the priest shall burn them on the slaughter place as an offering made by fire to Yahuwah.
Yes.
It is a guilt offering.
Yes.
Every male among the priests eats of it.
Every male among the priests eats of it. We are a nation of Kohanim. Read.
It is eaten in the kadosh place.
It is eaten in the kadosh place.
It is most kadosh.
It is most kadosh.
The guilt offering is like the sin offering.
The guilt offering is like the sin offering.
There is one Torah for them both.
There is one Torah for them both.
The priest who makes atonement with it, it is his. And the priest who brings anyone's ascending offering, the skin of the ascending offering, which he has brought, is the priest. It is his.
It is his. We're not talking about some animal offerings here. We're talking about the partaking of our offering, Yahushua HaMashiach. We're talking about the partaking of him which the priest and his family, provided that his family is clean, can partake of. We're talking about the partaking of him, of whom we cannot partake of unless we are clean. Unless the living water has cleansed us, we cannot partake of him. If you're dead, you're unclean, you cannot partake of him. Come on, read.
And every grain offering that is baked in the oven, and all that is prepared in the stewing pot or on a griddle is the priest who brings it. It is his. And every grain offering mixed with oil or dry is for all the sons of Aharon, for all alike. And this is the Torah of the slaughtering of Shalom offering.
And this is the offering. This is the Torah of the offering of the Shalom offering. The chastisement of our Shalom was upon him. He bore our guilt He bore our crookedness. He bore our crimes. We're talking about Yahushua HaMashiach, our Pasakh Lamb. We're talking about the partaking of Ruach. You cannot partake of Ruach if you're operating in crime. You cannot partake of Ruach. He cannot enter you if you're already the wife of another, if you already belong to another. You must be delivered. You must be set free from your master. There must be a divorce decree. He cannot enter you if you belong to another. And if you belong to another, you're dead. Hasatan is death. He is death. And if he is in you, if Baal is in you, you're dead. You are dead. He must be cast out. And you must be desperate to be free from him. As our ancestors cried out in Masraim, they cried out with a desperation as the harsh bondage and hard whip of Pharaoh began to afflict them. They cried out in such a manner that their cries reached Shamayim. And as their cries reached Shamayim, he sent deliverance to deliver them from Hasatan, to deliver them from darkness and to bring them into his marvelous light. To deliver them into his marvelous light. If you're not delivered before the Pasakh, if you're still dead, don't you dare partake of the Pasakh. He has declared in the Torah that he is cutting off. He's cutting off. If you have uncleanness on you and you're touching that which is kadosh, the Torah says you will be cut off. Come on, read.
Which is brought to Yahuwah. And if he brings it for a thanksgiving, then he shall bring with the slaughtering of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mixed with oil, and unleavened thin cakes anointed with oil, or cakes of finely blended flour mixed with oil. Besides the cake he brings as his offering, leavened bread together with the slaughtering of thanksgiving of his shalom offerings. And from it he shall bring one cake from each offering as a contribution to Yahuwah, to the priest who sprinkles the blood of the shalom offerings. It is his. As for the flesh of the slaughtering of his shalom offerings for thanksgiving, it is eaten the same day it is offered. He does not leave any of it until morning.
Read.
And if the slaughtering he brings is a vow or a voluntary offering, it is eaten the same day that he brings his slaughtering. And what is left of it is eaten the next day. But whatever is left of the flesh of the slaughtering on the third day is burned with fire.
Yes.
However, if any of the flesh of the slaughtering of the shalom offerings is eaten at all on the third day, it is not accepted. It is not reckoned to him who brings it. It is unclean to him. And the being who eats of it bears his crookedness. And the flesh that touches that which is unclean.
And the flesh that touches that which is unclean, read.
Is not eaten.
It's not eaten.
It is burned with fire.
It is burned with fire.
And as for the clean flesh, all who are clean eat of it.
All who are clean eat of it. We're talking about Ruach. These offerings represent Ruach. They represent Yahushua HaMashiach. It is not an offering that gives life. It is the spirit that gives life. The flesh profits nothing. We're talking about the partaking of Ruach, the partaking of Yahushua HaMashiach. We're not talking about a roasted lamb. We're talking about the partaking of Yahushua HaMashiach. It is the Ruach that gives life. The flesh profits nothing. But if you are unclean, you cannot partake of the offering. You cannot partake of the Pasakh. You cannot partake of the Ruach HaKadosh. And if you do not partake of the Ruach HaKadosh, you are dead and you are unclean. You are unclean and you cannot partake of him because you're dead and you're unclean. Do not harden your heart. Do not rebel against his word. Do not rebel against his word here in the consummation of the times. Here in this Muadah, a season unlike no other, in this greater separation. Do not rebel against his word. One in every 325,000 persons, 144,000 across this flat plain earth that will be sealed with the seal of the living Elohim. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against it. You are unclean if you have not ruach. You are dead. As the body is dead without breath, you are dead, and you are unclean and cannot partake of the Pasakh. Read.
But the being who eats the flesh of the slaughtering of shalom offerings,
Read.
that belongs to Yahuwah while he is unclean.
While he is unclean.
That being shall be cut off from his people.
That being shall be cut off from his people. The chastisement of our shalom was upon him. He is our shalom offering. He is our Pasakh offering. He is all the offering. This being with uncleanness upon him, a dead person, shall be cut off. Karath shall be destroyed. Shall be cut off from the head, and covenant shall be destroyed. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against it. You are responsible for what you are hearing. Do not rebel against this word. If you are unclean, if you have not ruach, you are dead and unclean, and you cannot partake of the Pasakh. He will not be mocked any longer. The destroyer comes. Come on, read.
And when a being who touches that which is unclean, of the uncleanness of man, or of the uncleanness of beast, or of unclean abominations, and shall eat the flesh of the slaughtering of shalom offerings, that belongs to Yahuwah, that being shall be cut off from his people.
Karah, destroyed from his people, separated from the head, separated from covenant. To be cut off from his people is to be separated from him who dwells in the midst of his people. It is to be cut off from covenant. There is only one unforgivable sin, and that is the rejecting of the Ruach HaKadosh. That is the rejecting of the Pasakh lamb. That is the rejecting of the living bread, the lakam shamayim, the unleavened bread that came down from heaven. This is the only unforgivable sin. This is the only unforgivable one of which we cannot partake of if we are unclean. And if we are unclean, we are dead, because the living water has not cleansed us. And thus we cannot partake of the Pasakh lamb. We cannot partake of the festival. He is the festival. He is the feast. He is the festival offering bound to the altar. He is the festival, and you cannot partake of him if you are dead. If you have not breath in you, if you have not life, if you have not the ruach, if you have not eating of his flesh and drinking of his blood. And he will not come if you belong to Baal. He will not come if you are the wife of Baal, if he is in you. You must be set free first. You must be delivered first before he will come into you. You are held captive. You are in Egypt. You are in the land of Masraim, and you must cry out for deliverance. You must go to the threshing floor and cry out for deliverance. For deliverance to come unto you. For a strong man to come. A stronger man to come and bind the strong man in the house. For in order for one to plunder a strong man's good, he must first go in and bind the strong man. Then he can plunder the strong man's goods. You are the strong man's goods. You are his goods. And Yahushua must come in and bind the strong man and cast him out of you. But once he binds the strong man and casts him out of you, and that ruach that was driven out of you, that goes through dry places looking for rest, and it comes back and then finds that house swept clean and put in order. In other words, void of the Ruach HaKadosh. And then goes and gets seven more ruach, more wicked than him, and come and dwells in that place. You'd better make sure that once that house is clean and swept and put in order, that you're crying out for that living bread, that you're crying out for the lakam shamayim, that you're crying out for the living water, that you're hungering and thirsting for righteousness so that he will fill you. Do not deceive yourselves. Do not deceive yourselves. There are mimicking ruach that can even mimic and deceive you. You are dead if you have not the authentic Ruach HaKadosh. And if you are dead, you are unclean. which means that you cannot partake of the Pasakh. The Torah says you will be cut off, karath, destroyed, separated from the head and from covenant. Read, little one. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 23 to 34. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 to 34. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 to 34. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 to 34. Do not rebel against this word. You rebel against this word, your blood is on your own head. Your blood is on your own head if you rebel against this word. He sent me to warn you. In the wee hours of the morning, he impressed upon me that I had to warn you. And all that are listening under the sound of his voice, you have been warned. You have been, in fact, been warned now for weeks, for years now, about the seal of the living Elohim, about the receiving of living water, about the receiving of his Ruach HaKadosh. You have been warned now for years. And now we embark upon the Pasakh season. And many of you, most of you are dead and you are unclean and you cannot partake of the Pasakh. But now you have been warned. You have been warned in accordance with the Torah. You cannot partake of the Pasakh because you are defiled for the being of a dead person. You, yourself, you're defiled because of you. Because you are dead. Because you have not breath. You have not life. You have not the blood of Yahushua coursing through your veins. You have not the living water of the red heifer that cleanses from all sin. You have not gone out to him to be cleansed from all sin. The living water has not entered you to cleanse that inner cup. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23
yes, to 34.
Through 34. Beginning at verse 23. Read, little one.
For I received from the master that which I also delivered to you.
Yes.
That the master Yahushua, in the night in which he was delivered up,
yes,
took bread.
We're talking about Pasakh now. We're talking about Passover. Read.
And having given thanks, he broke it and said,
yes,
take,
eat.
This is my body.
This is my body. This is the Lakam Shamayim. This is the living bread that came down from heaven. This is my body. This is me. When you partake of the bread, you're partaking of me. The living bread that gives life. Read.
Which is broken for you.
Which is broken for you.
Do this in remembrance of me.
Do this in remembrance of me.
In the same way also the cup.
And in the same way also the cup. Read.
After supper saying.
After supper saying.
This cup is the renewed covenant in my blood.
This cup is the renewed covenant in my blood. This is what the church calls communion.
As often as you drink it.
As often as you drink it.
Do this in remembrance of me.
Do this in remembrance of me. This is my blood, the blood of the renewed covenant.
For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup.
Yes.
You proclaim the death of the master until he comes.
You proclaim the death of the master until he comes. We're not talking about simply partaking of physical bread and physical wine. We're talking about the partaking of his blood, of life. For the life of the creature is his blood. We're talking about Ruach. We're talking about eating of his flesh and drinking of his blood. The flesh profits nothing. It is the Ruach, it is the spirit that gives life. And without life, you are dead. You're a dead man, you're a dead woman, and you are unclean because the blood of Yahushua has not cleansed you and set you free. The living water has not cleansed you. The water, the given for purification, the water of the red heifer has not cleansed you, and you're still dead in accordance with Numbers 19. It says it. If you're not cleansed with it, you're cut off from your people. You're cut off from his people forever. If you're not cleansed with the water given for purification. This means that you have rejected the living water. This means that you have rejected the living bread. This means that you have rejected the Ruach HaKadosh, who alone gives life. And this means that you're dead and you're going to be dead throughout eternity, burning and being and ascending as a sweet-smelling, ascending offering into the nostrils of Yahuwah throughout eternity. Do not harden your heart. Do not rebel against this word. If you have not life, you are dead. If you have not his Ruach, the living water, the Ruach HaKadosh, the bread, the living bread from Shamayim. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead, and you're defiled, and you're unclean, and you cannot partake of the Pasakh. Read.
So that whoever should eat this bread or drink this cup of the master unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the master.
Shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the master. You shall be guilty in accordance with the Torah. Read.
But let a man examine himself.
But let a man examine himself.
And so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup.
And so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup.
For the one who is eating and drinking unworthily.
For the one who is eating and drinking unworthily with uncleanness upon him, the one who is dead. Read.
Eats and drinks judgment to himself.
Eats and drinks judgment. He will be destroyed unto himself. Karaf. Read.
Not discerning the body of the master.
Not discerning the body of the master. He's been patient with you up until now. He's been patient with you. But he will not be mocked, and do not try him. Do not test him. Do not rebel against this word. You are unclean. You are dead without breath. You're dead, stinking thing, defiled for the being of a man. And you cannot touch the Pasakh. Read.
Because of this, many are weak and sick among you.
Because of this, many are weak and sick among you, because you're touching which is clean and you are unclean. Read.
And many sleep.
And many sleep, many are dead, many have been destroyed. Karaf.
For if we were to examine ourselves.
For if we were to examine ourselves.
We would not be judged.
We will not be judged.
But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the master.
But when we are judged, we're disciplined by the master.
That we should not be condemned with the world.
That we should not be condemned, destroyed with the world.
So then, my brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. And if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home.
Let him eat at home.
Lest you come together for judgment.
Lest you come together for judgment. You have an opportunity to examine yourselves. This is the consummation of the times. You have an opportunity to examine yourselves. You're dead and you know you're dead. You're dead and you know you're dead. If you're dead, you're unclean. You're defiled for the being of a person. You have no breath in you. You have no life in you. The living bread, you have not eaten the living bread. You have not partaken of his flesh and drinking of his blood. The living water of the red heifer has not cleansed you from crime. And you're dead and you're unclean, you're defiled. And you cannot partake of the Pasakh. You cannot defile his kadosh things any longer. You cannot defile what is kadosh any longer. He will not be mocked. He will not be mocked. Do not rebel against this word. Give us another precept. Keep reading.
And the rest I shall set in order when I come.
Barak Yahuwah. Give us another precept.
1 Corinthians 5, 6, and 8.
1 Corinthians 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. All of the messages as of late have culminated in this one. Culminated in this one, this in the season of Pasakh. It's culminated in this one, and which with many of you, it has entered the ear and exited through the other ear. You have not taken them to heart. But do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against this word. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, beginning at verse 6. Read, little one.
Your boasting is not good.
Your boasting is not good.
Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the entire lump?
Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump?
Therefore cleanse out the old leaven.
Therefore cleanse out the old leaven.
So that you are a new lump.
So that you are a new lump. You, me, are a new lump. Read.
As you are unleavened.
As you are unleavened, provided that you have partaken of the unleavened bread, the living bread that came down from Shamayim, Yahushua HaMashiach. If you've partaken of him, the true unleavened bread, then indeed you too are unleavened. You are his house. That table with the showbread is in you, with the oil and the light of the menorah is in you, provided that you have partaken of him. Read.
For also Mashiach our Pasakh was slaughtered for us.
For also Mashiach our Pasakh was slaughtered for us.
So then let us celebrate the festival festival.
So then let us celebrate the festival.
Not with old leaven.
Not with old leaven.
Nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness.
Nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness.
But with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth.
But with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. The unleavened bread of righteousness. He is the Pasakh. He is the unleavened bread. He is the living bread that came down from Shamayim. He, and you cannot partake of him if you're unclean. You cannot partake of him. That house must be cleansed first. That house must be, there must be an eviction notice served in that house. And the only way for an eviction notice to be served is you must first repent and turn from your sin. And you must cry out from that place for deliverance. You must cry out to him from Egypt, from the land of Masrayim. You must cry out so that Yahuwah is deliverance, comes to deliver you. And once he has swept your house, go down to the water given for purification. Place your crooked hands, your wicked hands upon his head as our ascending offering. Confess your crimes over his head and let him bear your crookedness. Go into the water for immersion. Be immersed into his name. Be impaled with him as an ascending offering. Die with him, whereby having the penalty of death paid in you through belief in him, be buried with him and be resurrected to the newness of life. And if you have entered that water with a hunger and a thirst for righteousness, he has promised to fill you. And when he has filled you, he has then resurrected you from the dead. He has then entered into covenant with you. He has then proclaimed you to be clean. Only then will you be clean when the living water enters you, when the Ruach HaKadosh enters you, when you have partaken of the blood, when you've partaken of the flesh. Only then will he declare you to be clean. And only then can you partake of the feast, of the festival. Otherwise, if you're dead, you're unclean, and you cannot partake of this feast. Come on, read, little one.
Exodus 12. We're going back to Exodus 12, 48.
Going back now to Exodus 12.
49.
Going back now to Exodus 12, Shamut chapter 12. Reading from verses 48 and 49. Going back to Shamut, Exodus 12. Reading verses 48 through 49. Shamut, Exodus 12. Reading verses 48 through 49. Shamut, Exodus 12, reading verses 48 and 49. Beginning at verse 48, read, little one.
And when a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Pasakh to Yahuwah,
listen, read.
let all his males be circumcised.
Let all his males be circumcised.
And then let him come near and perform it.
And then let him come near and perform it.
And he shall be as a native of the land.
And he shall be as a native of the land.
But let no uncircumcised eat of it.
But let no uncircumcised eat of it.
There is one Torah for the native born.
There is one Torah for the native born.
And for the stranger who sojourns among you.
And for the stranger who sojourns among you. Barak Yahuwah, thank you, Master. There are three things that identify his covenant people. There are three signs. There are three visible signs that identify his covenant people. Barak Yahuwah. One is the blood. One is the blood. First, let's look at sign. In the Abarit behind sign, we find Awuf. Awuf, Aleph, U, and Tar. Indeed, Yahuwah is the Aleph and the Tar, the beginning and the everlasting covenant. The U is represented again by a tent peg or a nail or something that affixes and joins. And so there are three signs. The first sign is the blood, it's the dam. It's the dam. The dam again is representation of Ruach. As the dam of the Dalet and the Mam. The Dalet is represented by a door and the Mam is represented by water, which is always a representation of Ruach, of spirit. So when he says, unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you have no life in you. It is the spirit that gives life, he says further down. The flesh profits nothing. And so it is the Ruach that joins us at the covenant with Yahuwah. It is the Ruach that joins us at the covenant with him. And the feast days, all of them are reserved for his covenant people. So the first sign is the blood. The first sign is the blood. The second sign is the Shabbat day. It also is identified as YAHUAH, that joins us or connects us into covenant with YAHUAH, because he is the eternal Shabbat. And when we guard the Shabbat, we are reverencing him. We are reverencing the eternal Shabbat, which is him. And it joins us into covenant with him. It identifies him as the Elohim of creation and identifies us as his covenant people. The third sign is the circumcision. The third sign is the circumcision that joins us into covenant with him. An identifying marker, a sign that joins us into covenant with him. You see, an uncircumcised man is considered to be unclean. Yes, indeed, we're talking about the clean and the unclean. We're talking about the living and the dead, as his covenant people have been rescued and transitioned from death unto life. But an uncircumcised man is considered to be unclean, as an uncircumcised man is able to pull the skin back on the penis to reveal the nakedness underneath. Indeed, nakedness is synonymous with uncleanness. It is synonymous with shame. It is synonymous with sin. And thus an uncircumcised man is seen to be unclean. When he is circumcised, and the skin then begins to heal, it grows in such a way that the skin now cannot be pulled back to expose the nakedness underneath. And thus he is considered to be clean. Moreover, it is considered to be a clothing. As a husband now, and we're talking about covenant, is required to give three things to his wife: food, clothing, and marital rights. And thus the circumcision, once the skin grows back, it is a clothing, it is a covering, the covering of shame, the covering of the shame of Kua, the covering of the shame of the wife. It is a sign of covenant, as a man does not have to clothe anyone other than his wife. So it is a sign of covenant. It is a sign that we are in covenant with him. It is a sign that we are in covenant with him, and thus we are to circumcise our 8-day-old sons. We are to circumcise our 8-day-old sons. But what about the adults, you say? This is a shadow. This is a shadow of a circumcision not made with hands. This is a shadow of a circumcision not made with hands, because the master desires for all men to be brought into covenant with him. Male and female, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And he desires for all mankind to be reconciled back to him. Thus we go all the way back to the garden, when Adam and Kua were naked and they were unashamed. And after they had transgressed the Torah, and it is the Torah that reveals nakedness. When they transgressed the Torah, their nakedness was revealed. Their nakedness was shown, and they realized and understood that they were naked. They realized and understood that they had transgressed the Torah. And thus YAHUAH, in renewing the everlasting covenant with them, he slew 2 animals. And he covered their nakedness with skin. He covered their nakedness, their shame, with skin. Becoming their husband, covering their shame. He covered their nakedness with skin. These skins were made not with hands. They were not made with hands. And that was a shadow of a circumcision not made with hands. Do you understand? And when you are circumcised, you are no longer unclean, because the living water has entered you. The Ruach HaKadosh has entered you. The consuming fire of Yahuwah Al-Yun has entered you. You are partaken of the living bread. You are partaken of the bread from Shamayim. You have eaten of his flesh. And as you eat of his flesh and he enters you, he circumcises the heart A circumcision not made with hands, and thus you are no longer unclean. You are no longer dead. You're no longer separated from him. You're no longer separated from covenant. Thus it works hand in hand, you see. It works hand in hand. When he enters us, when the living water enters us, we're no longer unclean. And then he circumcises the heart, whereby we're no longer unclean. No one circumcised, no one unclean can partake of the Pasakh. No one without breath can partake of the Pasakh. No one outside of covenant who is dead, who is unclean, who have not received the breath, the living breath, the breath of the breath of Yahuwah, Al-Yun, the living water, the consuming fire, the Ruach HaKodesh. You're dead. You're dead. You're outside of covenant with him. You're not his bride. You're not his wife. This food is given to his bride. As a husband is to provide food for his wife, he is to provide the food, the clothing, and marital rights for his wife. He is to provide food for her. He does not have to provide food for another man's wife. No, he doesn't. Thus, the festival offering is for his bride. It's for his bride, the one of whom he has entered as a man enters a woman. The one of whom he has clothed. He has clothed her nakedness and covered her shame. He has taken away her uncleanness. He has declared that this day is Gilgal. I have removed from you the shame of Egypt this day, the shame of your uncleanness, the shame of Masraim. I have delivered you from Egypt. I have delivered you from the hand of Hasatan, from another. I have delivered you from the land of sin, from slavery and bondage. And this day, speaking of Joshua circumcising the men before they entered into the promised land. This day, I have declared after he had circumcised them. This day is Gilgal. I have removed the shame and the degradation from Egypt from you. I've brought you into covenant with me. I've covered your shame. I've covered your nakedness. I've covered your uncleanness. You are no longer unclean. You are no longer dead. You're in covenant with me. I've breathed my breath into you. Now you can partake of my Pasakh. You can partake of my Kaddish festivals. Otherwise, you are unclean, and you cannot partake. Give us another precept, little one.
Deuteronomy 16, 1 through 16.
Deuteronomy 16, 1 through 16. Dabarim, chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. Dabarim, chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. How are we looking for time, little one?
131.
Barak Yahuwah. Dabarim, chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. Beginning at verse 1. Read, little one.
Guard the new month of Abib.
Guard the new month of Abib. Read.
And perform the Pasakh.
And perform the Pasakh.
To Yahuwah your Elohim.
To Yahuwah your Elohim.
For in the new month of Abib.
For in the new month of Abib.
Yahuwah your Elohim brought you out of Mitzrayim by night.
Yahuwah your Elohim brought you out of Mitzrayim by night. Read.
And you shall slaughter the Pasakh to Yahuwah.
And listen, and you shall slaughter the Pasakh to Yahuwah.
Your Elohim.
Your Elohim.
From the flock and the herd.
From the flock and the herd.
In the place where Yahuwah chooses to put his name.
Whoa. In the place where Yahuwah chooses to place his name. Now, we understand now, after you've heard the master's voice, we're talking about a latter house now. A latter house that is to be greater than the former. We're talking about a latter house. Now, the Pasakh cannot be celebrated or slaughtered outside of the place where he's placed his name. That being his temple. That being his house. That being his Aikel. So then, once again, if you do not have the seal of the living Elohim, if you are not his house, if you're dead, you can't partake. If you're uncircumcised, you can't partake, which both allude to uncleanness. And if you're not his house, meaning that you have breath, he has entered you and he has written his name upon you. If you are not his house, we're talking about the meat of Torah. If you are not his house, you cannot celebrate the Pasakh. It cannot be celebrated anywhere else but the place where he's placed his name. 144,000 this season that he's written his name, writing his name upon our foreheads, sealing us with the seal of the living Elohim. becoming his house, becoming his dwelling place, becoming an ascending offering with him. Only in this place can we celebrate the Pasakh. Only in his house can we celebrate the Pasakh. You cannot celebrate the Pasakh anywhere else. If you're not his house, you can't celebrate the Pasakh. If you're not his house, you're unclean, you're dead. If you're not his house, you're uncircumcised. You're dead, you're unclean, and you cannot touch the clean thing. Lest you be cut off, corrupt, destroyed, separated from the head and from covenant. It cannot be celebrated. This is Torah. Any other place outside of his house. Do not ignore this warning. Do not ignore his word. Do not rebel against this word from him. Read.
Eat no leavened bread with it.
Eat no leaven, eat no sin with it.
For 7 days you eat unleavened bread with it.
For 7 days you eat unleavened bread. You eat the bread from Shamayim, the Lakam Shamayim, the living bread that comes down from Shamayim. Yahushua HaMashiach, the Ruach HaKadosh. When we celebrate in Ruach and in truth, we are to partake of Ruach for 7 days. We are to partake of him for 7 days and celebrate in him and us and him for 7 days and celebrate our deliverance from Masrayim. Celebrate in Ruach. Celebrate life for 7 days, provided that you have life. Come on.
Bread of affliction, because you came out of the land of Mitzrayim in haste, so that you remember the day in which you came out of the land of Mitzrayim all the days of your life. And no leaven should be seen with you in all your borders for 7 days.
No leaven found in this house. 7,000 years, no leaven found in us. Read.
Neither should any of the meat which you slaughter in the evening on the first day stay all night until morning. You are not allowed to slaughter the Pasakh within any of your gates.
You are not allowed to slaughter the Pasakh within any of your gates. Read.
Which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you.
Which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you.
But at the place where Yahuwah your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell.
144,000 worldwide, having the seal of the living Elohim, having his name written upon us, being his dwelling place, being his house, having the living water of the red heifer cleanse us from sin, being declared right through Yahushua HaMashiach, clothed in his righteousness. We are allowed to partake of the Pasakh, but if you have no life in you, if his blood is not in you, if you've not partaken of the living bread, if the living water is not in you, you're dead. You're defiled for the being of a man. You cannot partake of the Pasakh. You cannot partake of it. You must be his house. He must dwell in you. He must have circumcised your heart. He must have cleansed you with the living water of the red heifer, whereby declaring you to be clean, whereby no longer being unclean because you're no longer dead. You're no longer dead. And only then can you partake of the Pasakh. Read.
There you slaughter the Pasakh in the evening.
There you slaughter the Pasakh in the evening. Again, it's slaughtered in evening because this offering is given to deliver us from the reign of darkness and to deliver us into the reign of light. Thus at the 6th hour as Yahushua hung upon the stake, coming in the volume of the book as our Passover lamb, our Pasakh lamb, the whole earth went dark, showing that he came in the volume of the book to deliver his creation from darkness, from the power of Hasatan, to deliver us into his marvelous light. Read.
At the going down of the sun, at the appointed time you came out of Mitzrayim, and you shall roast and eat in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim chooses.
The place that he chooses is us. We are his dwelling place. We are that latter house. And we are now partaking of Ruach. We're partaking of Yahushua HaMashiach, our Pasakh lamb. Sure, we will eat a meal. We will celebrate. But if all you've eaten is a meal and have not partaken of Ruach, then you've missed the point. We must partake of him, and we cannot partake of him if we are unclean. You cannot partake of the Pasakh if you're unclean. All things according to the Torah. If you're dead, if you have the uncleanness of the being of man upon you, you have not the breath of Ruach, you cannot partake of him. You cannot partake of the feast. Come on, read.
And in the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. 6 days you eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there is a closing festival to Yahuwah your Elohim. You do no work. Count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. And you shall perform the festival of Shavuot to Yahuwah your Elohim, according to the voluntary offering from your hand, which you gave as Yahuwah your Elohim blesses you. And you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim, you and your son and your daughter, and your male servant and your female servant, and the Levite who is within your gates, and the stranger and the fatherless, and the widow who are in your midst, at the place where Yahuwah your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell.
At the place where Yahuwah your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell. Both male and female, man and woman, child alike, are to rejoice at the place where he has placed his name. 144,000 worldwide, having the seal of the living Elohim, having his name written upon our foreheads, being his dwelling place, being declared clean by the blood of Yahushua HaMashiach, of whom we've partaken of whom courses through our veins, of whom the living water of the red heifer has cleansed and purged and is washing us from all uncleanness. Read.
And you shall remember that you were a slave in Mitzrayim, and you shall guard and do these laws. Perform the festival of Sukkot for 7 days after the ingathering from your threshing floor and from your winepress. And you shall rejoice in your festival, you and your son and your daughter.
You and your son and your daughter.
And your male servant.
And your male servant.
And female servant.
And female servant.
And the Levite.
And the Levite.
And the stranger.
And the stranger.
And the fatherless.
And the fatherless.
And the widow who are within your gates.
And the widow who are within your gates, provided that they are clean. Read.
For 7 days you shall celebrate to Yahuwah your Elohim in the place which Yahuwah chooses. In the place which Yahuwah chooses, which is us. He chooses to dwell in us. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 through 18. He desires to dwell in us and write his name upon our foreheads. Male servants and female servants, both sons and daughters. He desires to dwell in us. Read. Because Yahuwah your Elohim does bless you in all your increase and in all the works of your hands. And you shall be only rejoicing. 3 times a year all your males appear before Yahuwah. 3 times a year all your males appear before Yahuwah. Now we just read that not only the males, but your male servant, your female servant, your daughter and your son, the widow and the Levite, all, your whole house, your wife too. All, not just the men, come and present themselves before Yahuwah 3 times a year, but he identifies the men here. Why? Because we are offerings. We are ascending offering. We represent Adam, the first fruit from the soil. We represent Adam, who is represented by the firstborn, the first that splits the womb. We represent Adam, and so we are to present ourselves as ascending offerings unto him. Leviticus chapter 1 declares that we are to be perfect ascending offerings unto him. The only way that we are to be perfect is that the perfect lamb is in us. The Ruach HaKadosh is in us. We are unleavened because he is unleavened. Only in this way can we present ourselves before him as perfect. Only in this way can we partake of the feast. Otherwise you're dead, you're unclean, and you cannot partake of the feast. And the Torah says you will be cut off. Karaf, separated from the head and from covenant. Read. Your Elohim in the place which he chooses, at the festival of Mazut, and at the festival of Shavuot, and at the festival of Sukkot, and none should appear before Yahuwah empty-handed. Barak Yahuwah, at the place where he has placed his name. Pasakh must be celebrated at the place where he's placed his name. We're talking about a latter house that is to be greater than the former. This latter house, which is being taken from esteem to esteem, and does not resemble the latter house is going to be. Yet in this season, we're still talking about this latter house. And the sealing of 144,000 with his name upon the foreheads, making us his dwelling place, making us the ascending offering that is presented before him 3 times a year. Those having the living water of the red heifer having gone out to him, and having the living water of the red heifer purge and cleanse us from all sin,
pouring life into us so that we are no longer dead, we're no longer defiled for the being of a man, thus making us worthy, declaring us worthy now to partake of the feast. If you have not breath, if you're not his dwelling place, then his name is not upon you, then you can't celebrate the feast. If his name is not upon you, then your heart is not circumcised, you're unclean. If his name is not upon you, then you're dead and you're unclean. And the Torah says you cannot partake. You cannot partake. Least your wrist being cut off from the head and from covenant forever. Come on, read.
Leviticus 17, 1 through 7.
Leviticus 17, 1 through 7. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. How many more precepts, little one?
After this is one more.
Barak Yahuwah, thank you, Master. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Beginning at verse 1. Read, little one.
And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying,
Read.
Speak to Aharon, to his sons, and to all the children of Yasharal.
Yes.
And say to them,
yes.
This is the word which Yahuwah has commanded, saying.
This is the word that Yahuwah has commanded, saying. Read.
Any man from the house of Yasharal.
Any man from the house of Yasharal.
Who slays a bull or a lamb or a goat in the camp.
Who slays a bull or a lamb or a goat in the camp.
Or who slays it outside the camp.
Or who slays it outside the camp.
And does not bring it to the door of the tent of appointment.
And does not bring it to the door of the tent of appointment, a ladder house. Read.
To bring an offering to Yahuwah.
To bring an offering to Yahuwah.
Before the dwelling place of Yahuwah.
Before the dwelling place of Yahuwah.
Blood guilt is reckoned to that man.
Blood guilt is reckoned to that man. You are unclean. Read.
He has shed blood.
He has shed blood.
And that man shall be cut off from among his people.
Karaf, cut off from his people. You cannot bring him an offering if you're not his house. You cannot partake of the Pasakh if you're not his house. You cannot. This is Torah. The Pasakh must be slain at the place where he's placed his name. And we are being slain with the Pasakh, him and us and him. We are the ascending offering with him that is slain at the house. It cannot be slain anywhere else outside the house according to Torah. If it is, there is guilt upon you. There is guilt upon you. There is guilt upon you, and he said you're going to be cut off from his people. Read.
In order that the children of Yasharal bring their slaughterings, which they slaughter in the open field, and they shall bring them to Yahuwah at the door of the tent of appointment to the priest, and slaughter them as slaughterings of shalom offerings to Yahuwah. And the priest shall sprinkle the blood on the slaughter place of Yahuwah at the door of the tent of appointment, and shall burn the fat for a sweet fragrance to Yahuwah. And let them no longer slaughter their slaughterings to demons after whom they whored. This is a law forever for them throughout their generations.
A law forever for us throughout our generations. The KJV, I like the way it reads. It says, let them no longer slaughter to goat demons. Let them no longer slaughter to Baphomet. Let them no longer slaughter to goat demons. If he ain't his house, that's who you're slaughtering to. Goat demons. You're slaughtering to Baphomet. You're slaughtering to Baal. If you're not his house, then you're not an ascending offering. There can be no offering. There can be no offering at that house. There can be no Pasakh at that house if you're not his house. You're unclean. You're dead because you have no breath in you. You have no life in you. The living water has not cleansed you. You're unclean. You cannot partake of the Pasakh. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against this word. Pasakh warning. The destroyer comes. Again, the word cut off here, it behind this word is the Abarit word karaf. Karaf, kaf, rash, and thaw. Rash again being represented by head and beginning. This represents Yahuwah. And the thaw representing covenant. This alludes to being cut off from the head and covenant forever. Do not rebel against this word. Do not rebel against it. Hear what thus says Yahuwah. Hear what thus says Yahuwah. If you have to celebrate the second month and the 14th day, then so be it. But even then, if you have not received life, if you have not received breath, then do not celebrate it even then. lest he cut you off from his people forever. This is the consummation of the times. You've heard his word, and you have no more excuse. Give us this last precept, little one.
Isaiah 1 through 20.
Isaiah, Ishayahu, chapter 1. Isaiah, Ishayahu, chapter 1. Isaiah, Ishayahu, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. Isaiah, Ishayahu, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. Isaiah, Ishayahu, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. Beginning at verse 1, read, little one.
The vision of Yashayahu, son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Yehudah.
Which he saw concerning who?
Yehudah.
Which he saw concerning Yehudah, read.
And Jerusalem.
And Jerusalem, read.
In the days of Uzziyahu.
In the days of Uzziyahu.
Yotham, Akaz, Kazayahu, sovereign of Yehudah.
Yes.
Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth.
Hear, O Shamayim, and hear, O earth.
For Yahuwah has spoken.
For Yahuwah has spoken.
I have reared and brought up children.
I have reared and brought up children.
But they have transgressed against me.
But they have transgressed against me.
An ox knows his owner.
An ox knows his owner.
And a donkey its master.
And a donkey its master.
Its master's crib.
Its master's crib.
Yasharal does not know.
Yasharal does not know.
My people have not understood.
My people have not understood.
Allah sinning nation.
Allah sinning nation.
A people loaded with crookedness.
A people loaded with crookedness.
A seed of evildoers.
A seed of evildoers.
Sons acting corruptly.
Sons acting corruptly.
They have forsaken Yahuwah.
They have forsaken Yahuwah.
They have provoked the Kadosh one
They
of
have
Yasharal.
provoked the Kadosh one of Yasharal. Do not provoke him any longer. Do not partake of his Kadosh thing with uncleanness upon you. Read.
They went backwards.
They went backwards.
Why should you be stricken anymore?
Why should you be stricken anymore?
You continue in apostasy.
You continue in rebellion, in apostasy. Do not rebel against this word. Read.
All the head is sick.
All the head is
and
sick.
all the heart faints.
And all the heart faints.
From the sole of the foot.
From the sole of the foot.
To the head there is no soundness in it.
To the head there is no soundness in it.
Woundness and bruise and open sores.
Woundness and bruises and open sores.
They have not been closed or bound up.
They have not been closed or bound up.
Or soothed with ointment.
Or soothed with ointment.
Your land is laid waste.
Your land is laid waste. Hear him.
Your cities are burned with fire.
Your cities are burned with fire. Hear him.
Strangers devour your land in your presence.
Strangers devour your land in your presence. Hear him.
And it is laid waste.
And it is laid waste.
As overthrown by strangers.
As overthrown by strangers. Hear him.
And the daughter of Zion is left as a booth in a vineyard.
And the daughters of Zion is left as a booth in a vineyard.
As a hut in a garden of cucumbers.
As a hut in a garden of cucumbers.
As a besieged city.
As a besieged city.
Unless Yahuwah of hosts had left to us a small remnant.
Unless Yahuwah of hosts had left to us a small remnant.
We would have become like Saddam.
We would have become like Sodom.
We would have been like Amorah.
We would have been like Amorah.
Hear the word of Yahuwah, you
Hear
members of Saddam.
the word of Yahuwah.
Give ear to the Torah of our Elohim, you
Give
people of Amorah.
ear to the Torah of Yahuwah of Elohim.
Of what use to me are your many slaughterings
Of
declared
what
Yahuwah.
use to me of your many slaughterings.
I have had enough of ascending offerings of ram and the
I
fat
had
of
enough
beef.
of your sending offerings. Read.
I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of the lambs or goats.
I do not delight in the blood of bulls
When you
or
come
goats.
to appear before me,
When you come to appear before
who
me,
has required this from your hand to
who has
trample my
required this
vineyard?
from your hand?
Stop bringing futile offerings.
Stop bringing your futile offerings to
Incense,
me.
it is an abomination to me.
It is an abomination to me.
New months, Shabbats, the calling of gatherings. I am unable to bear unrighteousness.
I am unable to bear
An
unrighteousness.
assembly.
An assembly.
My being hates your new months.
My being hates your new
And your
month.
appointed times.
And your appointed
They
time.
are trouble to me.
They are trouble to me.
I am weary of bearing
I
them.
am weary of bearing them.
And when you spread out your hands,
And when you spread out your
I
hands,
hide my eyes from you.
I hide my eyes from you.
Even though you make many prayers,
Even though you make many
I
prayers,
do not hear.
I do not hear.
Your hands have become filled with blood.
Your hands have become filled with blood.
Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean.
Wash yourselves and make yourself clean.
Put
Hold
away
up.
the
Wait.
evildoers.
Wait. Wash yourselves and make yourself clean. We're not talking about a bath here. We're talking about the living water of the Ruach HaKodesh, the living water of the red heifer. It is he and he alone who makes clean. Otherwise, he does not bear with you any longer. Your feet are an abomination to him. You're unclean. You're dead. Unless the living water of the red heifer of the Ruach HaKodesh has cleansed you, he will bear with you no longer. Come on, read.
From before my eyes, stop doing evil.
Stop doing evil.
Learn to do good.
Learn to do good.
Seek right ruling.
Seek right ruling.
Reprove the oppressor.
Reprove the oppressor.
Defend the fatherless.
Defend the fatherless.
Plead for the widow.
Plead for the widow.
Come now and let us reason together.
Come now and let us reason together.
Says Yahuwah.
Says Yahuwah.
Though your sins are like scarlet.
Though your sins are like scarlet.
They shall be as white as snow.
They shall be as white as snow when the blood of Yahushua cleanses you from all sin.
Master.
When the blood of Yahushua cleanses you from all sin. When you partake of his flesh and drink of his blood, he will cleanse you from all sin. He will circumcise your heart. He will clothe your nakedness. He will cover your uncleanness. He will wash away the blood of you. He will enter you and call you to be his tabernacle, cause you to be his house, write his name upon your forehead. And he will receive your ascending offerings. He will receive your Pasakh celebration. Otherwise, it is an abomination to him. It is an abomination to him. The mouth of Yahuwah has spoken. The mouth of Yahuwah has spoken. Do not rebel against his word. Do not rebel against him. Do not rebel against this warning. Karaf, he destroys. Pasakh warning, the destroyer comes, he destroys. You have no excuse. You've heard this word. If you're defiled for the being of a man, if you're dead and have not received life, the Ruach HaKodesh, if you're not his dwelling place, if your heart has not been circumcised, you cannot partake. You cannot partake. Go to the threshing floor, the place where the wheat is separated from the chaff, the place where consuming fire thoroughly cleanses the threshing floor, gathering the wheat into the barn, scattering the chaff to be burned in this season of a greater separation. Cry out to him. Repent from your wickedness, from your unclean ways, from your uncleanness. Repent and cry out to him with your whole heart to be delivered from a hand that's stronger than yours, to be delivered from the house of Baal. Cry out to him to deliver you, to cleanse that house, to set that house in order. And once that house has been set in order, swept clean and put in order, go to the water. Place your hands upon the head of the ascending offering of Yahushua HaMashiach. Place your crooked hands upon his head. Let him bear your crookedness. Confess your crimes over his head. Go into the water to be impaled with him, to be immersed into his name, to be impaled with him, to die with him, to be an ascending offering with him, whereby having the penalty of death paid in you through him, be buried with him and be resurrected from the dead, provided that you go to that place with a hunger and a thirst for righteousness. For he has promised if you go there with a hunger and a thirst for righteousness, he will fill you with life. He will fill you with living bread, the bread from Shamayim. He will fill you with the Ruach HaKodesh. He will circumcise your heart. He will wash you and make you clean. He will make you his house. He will put a consuming fire in you and cause you to be a continual offering. Cover you in his righteousness and call you to be worthy to partake of the feast of the Pasakh Lamb. Otherwise, don't you do it. Don't you do it. Not this time. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. He will be mocked. He will be mocked no longer. He will be mocked no longer. Master Yahuwah, all who rebel against this word, Let the judgment of Torah come down. All who rebel against your mouth, let the judgment of Torah come down upon them. Let Torah be made great. Let Yahuwah be true. Let every man be a liar. It is my prayer that this word is gone forth as a hammer that shatters across the whole earth, across the whole flat plain earth, to every ear whom you've given an ear to hear. That this seed, that this word has sunk down deep in their innermost being in a tilled and fertilized heart, made conducive to the planting of seed. And let the living water go and water that seed that has been planted in soil that has been made ready. Let that seed conceive life and sprout forth from the soil to become a tree, a fruit-bearing tree that produces the fruit that leads to everlasting life. Otherwise, Master, my prayer again, let it go up into your ear. All who rebel against your word, all who rebel against this warning this day, let the judgment of Torah be manifest upon their head. Let them no longer defile and profane your Kadush things. Let them no longer place the defiled, unclean hands upon your Kadush things. Let the judgment of Torah manifest upon their heads. Let not this word return void to you, Master, but let it accomplish that which you have sent it forth to do. In the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, so be it, so be it, so be it. For those of you on YouTube, praise Abba that he sent you this way to hear this word. If you have heard it, you are responsible. You are equally responsible as those who are alive. You are responsible for what you have heard. Do not rebel against it. The Pasakh is not some social gathering. It's not some party. It is Kadush. We are partaking of our Pasakh Lamb who suffered for us from the 3rd to the 9th hour, who suffered grievously for us, who suffered an unbearable pain for us and poured out all his blood, all his dam upon the earth to redeem his firstborn, the Yaqib, the apple of his eye, from darkness and to bring us into his marvelous light. We are partaking of him. We are partaking of his death. Do not rebel against this word. Until the next time that we meet, Yahuwah barak you and guard you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and show favor unto you. Yahuwah lift up his face upon you and give you shalom. Thus you shall put my name on the children of Yasharal, and I myself shall barak them. So be it, so be it, so be it. Shalom.